What does the future of education look like? I think education is one of our most important pillars of society since it determines basically the future of every generation. Some of the things that to me seem outdated about current education are static classrooms, like static syllabuses, because if you think about it, each person is individual. They have their own learning style, their own interests, their own curiosity. So trying to teach every child the same thing doesn't make sense. Testing is also completely outdated. Not everyone does well on tests, but some people do extremely well in the practical world, even though they don't do well on like written exams or multiple choice questions. Um, I think those are mainly it. And then maybe just the emphasis on in person. Although COVID with remote education did actually hurt a lot of kids' progress and they fell behind. But I think there are viable alternatives. So I think the future of education will be heavily individualized, likely with parents playing a big role. They won't necessarily be homeschooling, but I think they will be monitoring the process. They'll be heavily involved. They'll have a big say in the curriculum of their individual child. And the child itself will have a bigger say through their own curiosity and interest, where they can choose how they explore and specialize over time. Because I think the future of education is not that we're printing out factory workers or clerks or carbon copies of people who can be, office workers, compliant, and so on. I think the ideal future of education is we create individual specialists who know what they like and pursue that, and who can critically think and critically argue for their own opinions, and who can stand up to authority and disagree with adults and so on. And you actually do see this in a lot of homeschooled kids. Like they will call out adults who are being shitty and they won't hesitate to do it. Kids have a natural proclivity for the truth, and I think we can help them towards that rather than crush that curiosity. The current school system tends to crush a lot of curiosity and uh, tries to shape people into a box and reduces their individuality down to whatever we think is a good, student or a good child. So it will be heavily individualized. The next thing is there will probably be AI assistants, but I don't think AI will be the main teachers. I think what we'd end up doing is something like Seth Godin has talked about, which is you take world class teachers and you record the lectures once, kind of like Khan Academy. So instead of having a whole bunch of average teachers repeating lectures every day in school, you get world class teachers to do it once, and then students can watch it at home anywhere they want, and they get to pick the subjects that they like, they get to progress at their own pace. And since kids do benefit heavily from socialization, you then have school or some form of socialization, basically, be part of the daily or weekly activity. So kids can go out and meet once a week or a couple of times a week, but they don't have to meet uh, in a classroom, right? That's the interesting thing. It could be more like field trips, it could be picnics, it could be some form of more natural socialization, because the whole point of them meeting is to socialize, not to pass a test or to listen to a lecture, right? So there's no point for them doing that with other kids. They could maybe do group projects, right? They could build something together. They could play with Legos. They could explore a museum. There are all sorts of possibilities. So it'll be individualized, AI assisted. Uh, they'll have access to the best recordings in the world. They'll meet up to socialize, not to get tested or to listen to lectures. Uh, and then I think the final step is ultimately asking ourselves, what is education for? Right? Because how do we produce critical thinkers instead of factory workers? And I think that requires a deep, hard look at ourselves, because I suspect that we still have a stigma against critical thinking, because so many parents still do not like it when their children talk back, whatever that's supposed to mean. And yet we prize adults who can speak up for themselves, but we don't like it when our children do that. And yet the only way to get adults who can stand up for themselves is to raise children who will. And children naturally will. We just have to get out of their way. But I think that requires more self reflection on our part as a society to get to the point where we're comfortable enough in ourselves to let go of a sense of control over our children so that they can be rebellious enough and independent thinking enough and be different enough from us, with us trusting that, okay, when they're adults, all of that freedom as children will help them integrate into society well, and they don't have to agree with us to be a good part of our society, especially because, independent thinking is what will lead them to innovate and create new solutions to problems that we are stuck on. And I think once we get past that step, then we can truly have an education system that supports children and builds towards a better future for everybody involved, rather than, I think, the current situation, which really stifles children. And the geniuses are the exceptions, where I think with the right education system, geniuses will actually be more of the norm. They will no longer be the exception.